You know what's frustrating about managing security as an MSP? It's knowing that even after you've reviewed a system, firewall, or endpoint to make sure it's secure, it can still change the next day and you might never find out. Let me tell you, that sucks. That's why I want to tell you about LionGuard. See, some vendors talk about being a single pane of glass, but LionGuard actually delivers. They pull data from over 70 systems, use automation to detect changes, and alert you about the things that matter via a ticket in your PSA. If you truly want to secure your customers, visit msspalert.com/LionGuard. Check it out for yourself or sign up for a demo today.
All right, welcome back to Cyber for Hire, the Managed Security Podcast. Once again, I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media. In the first half of our show, we talked about the biggest benefits and challenges associated with adoption of the CIS framework, featuring LionGuard's Joe Alapat and Matt Miller. If you missed it, you may want to check it out at some point. But right now, I'd like to welcome back my co-host, Ryan Morris from Morris Management Partners, because it's time for us to examine our MSSP industry and leadership topic of the day. Presenting our big idea in business, firing your clients. When should MSSPs cut ties with their customers? It's a tough call for MSSPs to make, but sometimes when a client relationship isn't working out, it may be time to cut your losses. Perhaps the customer isn't honoring its commitments to security hygiene, or maybe you're at odds over strategy, or it could be that your client is a major drain on your resources. This session will examine when to know it's the right time to go separate ways, and what's the most professional and responsible way to end your relationship. So Ryan, welcome back. Let's jump right into it. As always, I guess the first question here is you want to make sure if you are cutting ties with the client that it's worth it, because you're going to be losing revenue, a source of revenue stream by doing it. And also, maybe there's even a little bit of reputation at stake. So what trouble potentially are you getting into if you're going to decide I may want to drop this client, so at least you're aware of what the potential repercussions are so that then you can judge whether in this particular case it's worthwhile doing it or not?
See, I think that's a great place to start the conversation because in a fit of rage, in the depths of frustration, I am absolutely convinced every one of us has had that experience more than one time in our career where we said, screw it. It's not worth it. I don't care how much they're paying me. I'm out of here, right? Take this job and shove it. That is the urge. But in the spirit of be careful what you wish for, the one thing we've been trying to convince all of the customer industries that we work in of for the last 20 years is that what we do in cybersecurity is neither optional or peripheral or nice to have. It is mission critical, right? We've been on that mountaintop shouting that out there to our customers and saying to them, if you don't have proper protocols, if you don't have continuous monitoring, if you do not do the things that we're recommending, then you are vulnerable. And that is something that it's not just a sales pitch. This is, it's the technical equivalent of a financial or a fiduciary responsibility, right? I have a duty of care to my clients to say, you need to be protected. And I see these vulnerabilities and I can help you solve them. Okay, now they believe us, or at least many of them believe us. And if that is true in your client relationships, then quitting in a fit is professionally irresponsible, right? Like to the level of, we're not regulated the way the medical industry is, but it's almost the same thing as malpractice, right? If I've been saying to my customer, you cannot afford to be in business without cybersecurity protections. And then for whatever reason it is that they decided, that I decided I'm out of here, right? If I've been saying you need it, I don't like you anymore, I'm out of here. If they don't have a follow-up, if they don't have a backstop, a plan B, something that allows them to maintain their protocols and protections, and we just drop them and walk away, you are now the largest security threat in their environment. And that's not how a cyber professional would like to be described. So there's there are reasons and times, and we'll get into those here. But the first thing that we have to say is, let's make sure it's worth it, not just financially, but professionally, because they actually agree with us that what we do is mission critical, and stopping on a dime without notice, that's not cool in a fiduciary type relationship.
Sure. So obviously, again, there have to be pretty extenuating circumstances to warrant a decision like that. So let's talk about some of those reasons. What's on your short list of reasons that justify letting a client go? And then maybe as needed, we can go dive a little bit deeper into to each one.
You bet. And let me kind of start by saying there are many reasons that you could list, and I'm sure as the folks listening in are probably mentally, if not like obsessively, with a pen in their hand, making a list right now. This is why. Right? They're recounting all of the offenses and the things that have been done to wrong them in this world. I hear it, right? We need to get this out of an emotional conversation and into something that's a little bit more logical, structured, and manageable in order for it to be professional in our application. And I would put it into three essential categories of the reasons why it might not be a good idea to still be in business with a customer. The first one is an operational vulnerability. In other words, the client behaves in a way or does business in a way that not only introduces vulnerability to themselves, but also to me as their service provider, right? They are operating in a way that introduces uncontrollable variables and risks that are so high that they're going to get burned, I'm going to get burned in the process, and we need to make sure we understand the right time to get out of those. The second category, I would say, is a lack of trust and the lack of follow through. And that's different from risky behaviors in the sense of, I make a recommendation on things that you could do in order to improve your security posture, and you say, yeah, I don't buy that. I'm not going to do that even though you recommended it. It has layers to it, but this category is the one that I think is most common, most justifiable, right? Because again, if I'm approaching you and saying, I'm not just giving you a sales pitch. I'm not just saying cybersecurity is cool. Give me your money and I will sign you up for a piece of software. What I'm saying is I have an actual interest in your business operation being private, being secure, being protected. And these are the recommendations I'm making to do that. I don't expect everybody to agree with us 100% of the time, but if it gets to the point where it's like, guys, I'm not making this recommendation casually. It's not just for fun. It's not just a reason to upcharge the customer. It's a legitimate necessity. And they look at that recommendation and go, nah, I'm not going to do that. There's a deeper thing going on here that we need to reevaluate and maybe walk away from. The third category, very quickly, is the financial one. And as you mentioned, I think most of us begin by saying, if I lose money on that client, therefore I should fire them. That's the third of the three categories. It is valid, and there are times when the financial relationship is enough to sever the overall service provider relationship, but it should never be the first thing, because there are questions that we need to ask of ourselves before we start to point a finger at the customer, right? Do we communicate our value effectively enough? Are we actually communicating with the right people who can recognize and pay for value? Are the price points reflecting our need to be compensated for the things that we do? Are there inefficiencies that we have internally? Are we doing too much custom work and invention as opposed to systematic re-execution of best practices? There are things that we need to satisfy before we can just say, you don't pay me enough, I need to leave. Eventually, that is a reason, but we need to make sure we're kind of paying attention to that first.
For the first two, the operational vulnerabilities that put both sides at risk, and then also the lack of follow through on important foundational aspects of security hygiene and building a proper security posture. How much leeway or how much runway do you give them in terms of shaping up? Do you give them a forewarning at a certain point that this needs to stop? If it doesn't, here's ultimately what the ultimatum might be. How much leeway do you ultimately give them? Do you give them a probationary period to try to get their act together? If so, how much and how do you communicate that to them?
See, and now you're making this very real for us. There's what we need to do, and then there's how we go about doing it. Two very, very different things. And I believe style absolutely matters. It's almost never a good idea in a human relationship to approach somebody and just say, you know what, I'm done, I'm out. And they go, whoa, this is new. I didn't know you had any complaints. I wasn't aware that I was doing things that were bothering you. That's not a professional way to approach your clients. So there should always be a probationary period, a notification process. But boy, if you sent me a notification process tomorrow that said, warning, you are not in compliance, you are on a 30 or a 90 or whatever number of days warning that if you do not correct this, okay, functionally, that's the correct thing to do. Stylistically, you just freak people out and made them mad. They get defensive and they will take it personally if you're abrupt about those things. So I would say to you, a 90-day process is the responsible window. And it should never be a surprise to somebody that this is the first time we've heard about it. It's why operationally I am an advocate of the discipline and the cadence of the quarterly business review, right? Like we should not just be operationally communicating with our customers about this is what's going on and this is the tweak that I need you to make. There should be this overarching communication of relationship status. These are the things that are going well. These are the things that we have improved. These are the challenges we have, and these are the actions that we are taking to improve. That's a two-way conversation, right? Like that's not just things that I am doing as the service provider. It's things that you in this relationship as the client, you're also doing these things with me. Let's be in it together and let's communicate that and do it on a cadence of every 90 days. And if something is a little bit of an issue, we kind of mention it and we work on this thing. If we're working on it and another 90 days goes by and it hasn't changed at all, that thing goes from yellow status to red status, right? It's not the first time we've notified somebody, but red status means, guys, we've made a recommendation. Let's be serious about this. And then let's start moving in the direction of what the consequences might be to the relationship later on. It's totally appropriate to give that make good process, especially, heaven forbid you're dealing with large clients who do complicated work and have mission critical production level environment needs and requirements that we are servicing. What I just described right there, large and complicated and mission critical and urgent, that's the very best kind of a customer that we could have, right? That's, if I do the diagnosis on the business side, that's the most profitable kind of customer we could have. They need us. Well, by definition, that also means they can't turn that stuff on and off tomorrow. They can't make these changes in real time. There needs to be a responsible cadence of time and a forewarning so that people know what's coming and they don't just get that bad breakup where we go to a restaurant in public so they can't freak out at us when we tell them it's time to break up.
And before I ask you about that last step of when it actually gets to that point of how do you actually then deliver the breakup message, one other question I want to ask first, which is maybe we could give our viewers and listeners even a little bit more context around the first two scenarios that you gave us, the operational vulnerability that puts you at great risk, and also the lack of follow-up on certain security commitments. Can you give one example of each of those two scenarios that cross that official threshold of, oh yeah, this is officially unacceptable?
Yep, absolutely. And in fact, the first one I find deeply ironic and yet really, really good education. There was an MSSP that we were doing some consulting with who had clients in the legal field, right? They sold to law firms and provided cybersecurity services, which on the surface would make you think, these are folks who understand rules and contracts and the right way to behave in a business relationship, etc. And yet one of their clients was just notorious for the way that they would do, let's for categories call it pretrial discovery. They were a sneaky bunch, right? Like this was a client that could find secret emails and information and photographs about their client situations in ways that would make you go, that I'm not sure I'm okay with the way you guys came up with that, right? They were in their description, and the way that we heard it from the client was that this was an ethical hacking approach to legal services, where they were doing it for the right reason, and therefore it was protected and preserved. And yet it not only had legal implications for that law firm, and they were constantly getting sued for that, which is what they do for a living. So they weren't afraid of that kind of behavior, but it was exposing their service providers to those kinds of vulnerabilities. And it was presenting individual liabilities for some of the actual employees of the service provider. And this was something that they communicated with them multiple times. And eventually it just got to the point of, you know what, guys, I understand your business. I get where you're going. That's not the kind of security profile or the risk tolerance that we have as an organization. You can do what you do, but we need to make sure that we are protecting ourselves first. So we talked to our own lawyer, and here's what the recommendations are. And it turned into about a 90-day process of handing over, doing a turnover to a new service provider so that there was no gap in coverage. There was no lag in services that was happening. And the client went away happy, quite frankly, because they got somebody who was a little bit more operationally aligned with them. And frankly, that law firm actually still gives referrals to the original service provider. So it worked out well in the end because it was handled professionally, and it was something that they'd been complaining about for a while. And so the recommendation that we made to them was, let's do something about this because it's an issue. It could be a risk. Let's not just have that be a thorn in our shoe. Let's figure out if we can actually manage our way out of this thing. And they did. Right. So I think that was something that was a good instructional process for me. Quickly, in the second category, I think that the recommendations in the example that I'm thinking of were directly attached also to the third category, the financial factors, right? Because there was a lack of trust in this relationship where the MSSP, they used a quarterly business review cadence. They were always communicating with the client about, this is what's going on. These are your vulnerabilities. Here's how we would recommend to solve that. And after a couple of years in this relationship, the response that they would get back was essentially, oh, here comes the sales guy. Here comes the guy with his hand out. We know that you're in the building. Therefore, we're about to get a proposal to pay you for something. And in the beginning, there might have been a chuckle, I get where you're coming from, but it rose to the level of this client was reflexively they were not taking recommendations because they felt as though it was only for the purpose of increasing the financial billables for the service provider and not for legitimate or bona fide security reasons. At that point, the recommendation was, guys, either we have this conversation and we work it out, and you recognize that I'm not just an ambulance chaser, to borrow the legal terminology. I'm not just here for the money. I'm actually making these recommendations for the right reason. Senior executives outside of IT, outside of cybersecurity, all the way up the organization were involved in the conversation. And basically it came down to, we basically don't believe that you're making these recommendations for our benefit, but only for your benefit. At which point a letter was pushed across the table that said, we completely understand that that is your perception and it is a material harm to this relationship. we cannot effectively serve you when this is the tenor of our connection and trust. Therefore, here is a notice for you of 90 days intent to pass you along. And we're going to be responsible about it. We're going to make sure that you continue to be that you continue to be protected. But you've told us in very plain language, this ain't working. And we need to admit that and move on. You want to know the killer part of that experience? The CISO from that client left a year or so later, right? Got a new job with a new place, called back this original service provider and said, "Hey, I got a new job. I'd like to bring you in." To which the salesperson and the account manager and the senior executive at the MSSP were very professional, but very gratified to be able to say, I completely understand what you're looking for. I'm going to respectfully decline. It was they called me back and were like, "Oh, that was very cleansing to my soul
It felt
to
very
be
good.
able to say I
Yeah.
saw the potential pain down the road and I
Mm-hmm.
nixed it. I'm out."
Yeah, yeah. Really, that's a fascinating story. And I feel like, this is a good transition to our final question here before we wrap, which is I do want to talk a little bit more about that actual severing of the ties, making sure that there is some kind of a transition, that you're not leaving your client in a lurch, how you officially do cut ties. We often liken the client-provider relationship to, basically like a marriage, or you can't ghost your client. You can't, send a text breakup to your client. There has to be more, responsibility involved. So how do you do it in the proper way?
See, and you're right. I will lean into that relationship metaphor because I think it does give us some very good instruction, right? It's different of I'm in the relationship now, things ain't going okay. I need to find a good way out of this versus how do I set up a relationship from the very beginning to ensure that if we get to that point in the future, we can separate in a way that is as minimally disruptive as possible, right? If you think, human relationships that become marriages, you don't wake up one day and that's where you are, right? None of us were born married. You meet, you date consistently, you commit, you get engaged, you have a wedding. Later on, some of them get to the point of winding up in divorce. The number one psychological barrier to people agreeing to be married is, well, what happens if? Right? It's the unknown. It's the fear of the potential harm that will happen. And you know what? Humanity has designed a vehicle to prevent that or to address that. It's called a prenup. And while it might not have a great reputation in the interpersonal world, in the business service provider relationship world, it has a fantastic application and relationship. Before we sign the contract on day one with this customer, we need to make sure they understand these are the conditions under which we work and provide our services, our standards, our ethics, our professional things, and also the way that we manage our customer relationships. If these things don't work for you, we completely understand we should probably not be in business together. And then there is that next level of, okay, if we are going to get into business, you will acknowledge that these are the things I need from you, things you need from me. And in the contract vehicle itself, there is a clause that says reasons for potential separation. It's not a threat because nobody's misbehaved, right? It's nobody's being accused of anything. You can be very non-emotional about it and include it at the very beginning of the relationship. And then later on, when we get to that point of, guys, this isn't working out, we need to make a decision, it's because there's absolutely objective evidence that things that were included in the prenup have not been satisfied, and therefore it's perfectly reasonable for us to move on. Nobody is surprised in that situation, right? That's kind of the academic ideal. Most of us don't live in an academic tower. We live in the real world. So when we are making this decision where that prenup might not already be in place, evidence, opportunity to correct, and then a handover process, right? Like those are the three things that absolutely have to be true. It's not just because I don't like this situation. There's evidence documented about what is going on. And then we give them the opportunity to cure. And then we give an opportunity to manage through a seamless handoff process. And you can think about that through, right? Apply that three-step process to all three of the categories that we've been discussing. If it is a risky behavior or operational threat, I can say, hey guys, this is what's going on. This is where you are. Opportunity to cure. There's evidence, there's the opportunity, and then there's the workout process. That's true in the denied or failure to trust the recommendations, and it's also true in the financial sense. That's the one where people get a little squeamish, right? Like, geez, we need to get rid of these guys because we're losing money on them, but we can't tell the customer that. That'd be weird. And so we're going to manufacture a different reason. That's bad business, right? If you are losing money and that is absolutely material to your operation, we're not doing this for fun. It's a business, right? If you're losing money, it is absolutely appropriate to have that conversation with a customer and to say, I would love to continue to provide these services for you. However, let me break down what our financial situation is, and this is in the red. Our opportunity to cure is we could either provide fewer services, we could increase rates and billability for certain things. And if that is not acceptable to both sides, then we work through a workout process. In all three cases, those three steps are going to be the most professional way to work this process out. All right, guys, this is our big idea around the business of cybersecurity this week. What are your thoughts? We would love to get your feedback. Remember, cyber4hire at cyberrisk.com, or go to the show page and you can leave some comments. And we would love to get your insights and feedback on this process and what some of your experiences in the real world have been. Coming up shortly, we have our weekly news rundown. But first, we're going to do our Dear Cyber for Hire segment. This is our advice column segment where we get to do what we were just talking about and delve into the relationships between service providers and their clients. The following example that we are about to share is absolutely real and something that people deal with, but we're changing the names and some of the identifying details to protect the innocent and facilitate an open conversation. So, Brad, help us understand what relationship challenges are we facing this week?
All right, Ryan. Yes, we are back with even more juicy MSSP melodrama. And this one comes from the client side of the relationship. So, guys, cue the music. Dear Cyber for Hire, TMI. Sometimes it's good to leave a little mystery in a relationship. Certain things should just be left unsaid. Take my MSSP partner, for instance. They are burying me under an avalanche of data and reports. And the crazy part is a lot of the material they give me doesn't even offer much in the way of insights or recommendations that are meaningful to me. And then other information they provide gets way too in the weeds. Who knew that too much talk could be a romance killer? How do I express to my MSSP that sometimes less is more before this report fatigue turns into outright exhaustion? Sincerely, drowning in a dizzying deluge of data in Dansbury. Ryan, data and knowledge is power, especially in the fight against cyber threats, but is there such a thing as too much of a good thing?
There is absolutely such a thing, and I see it happen surprisingly often in the business of managed services. There's an existential question that, if you haven't heard it from your customer, I promise you your customers are thinking about this. Why are we paying this guy again? Or this service provider, this company that we are doing business with? Wait a minute, why are we paying them? What they mean by that is, what is the evidence that justifies the value of the price that we pay for what we get in return that improves our situation? It's the basic foundation of commerce and capitalism, right? If you can do something for me better, then I can do it for myself faster. You can do it more effectively, more at a higher level of quality. Then I will give you money in exchange for the output that you provide as a service provider. That's the basic foundation of business. Sometimes in the world of managed services, we are so good at what we do that the fire goes out in the customer's world. And what I mean by that is not the fire of, I like this relationship. It is the fire of, oh God, the sky is on fire and our business is burning down because we have so many threats and vulnerabilities and penetrations. We are getting hacked left and right. We're losing information. Our cybersecurity system is in chaos. That lack of control creates urgency. We feel acute pain. And then at some point, after we've engaged this professional service provider, the fire went out. The pain stopped. We're no longer in chaos. They've got control. They've implemented all of the things that needed to be done. We no longer get hacked. We no longer lose sensitive data. We no longer have unauthorized access to our assets or our environment. Everybody feels cool. Wait a minute, why am I paying you again? That is the impetus. And believe me, we've seen this large MSPs and small MSPs. There's this don't forget about me, and don't lose track of what makes me a valuable partner in this relationship. And so they give reports. I did this much work. I swear I'm trying hard. I promise I'm valuable. And you can sense these escalating levels of neediness and desperation, right? That get to the point of, if I don't constantly get the affirmation back from the client that, no, I swear it's good what you're doing. If I don't get that, then I tend to radically over communicate and I start to just bury people in all of these reports to justify my existence. It actually has the opposite effect of what you think it does. If it takes that much communication for you to A, do your job, and B, communicate that you are doing your job satisfactorily, you must not be very good at your job, right? Because the best possible, and you've heard this in your own relationships, Bradley, personally and professionally, I am absolutely certain, the most confidence-inspiring thing that you can hear from somebody in a relationship is, I got you. Right? Like, hey, don't worry about it. Whatever it is, I've got you. I understand your interests. I'm here to make sure that you are taken care of. I have the ability to take care of this. I've got you. Okay. Cool. In the best possible relationships, the most healthy ones, it doesn't take anything more than that. You look somebody in the face and you go, I got you. And they go, I feel you. And that's good. Right? Every piece of documentation we provide that is required in order to validate our existence in the relationship is evidence that we are one more step away from being in a good enough relationship that I got you is good enough.
All right. Good one, Ryan. I feel you. I hear what you're saying, and you never have to prove your worth or value to me. I couldn't do this show without you, so that's the good news there. That's something you never have to worry about.
And doggone it, people like us.
That's right.
For people of a certain age, you will catch that reference. For those of you who are too young to catch that reference, we'll explain it to you later.
Exactly. Well, hopefully our listeners have learned from this and don't make the same mistake. And remember, if you've been struggling with your managed security services relationship, whether you're the user or the provider, we want to hear from you. So please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberiskalliance.com, and we might use your letter in a future episode. In the meantime, as any security practitioner can tell you, there's no shortage of headlines filling up the cyber news feeds every single day. So we wanted to highlight a few items that we curated just for you, and so we present the security detail. Ryan, as always, headline number one goes to you. A new ransomware warning pilot program for critical infrastructure operators. Tell us more.
This is another one of the positive outputs of regulation, or at least policy that leads to regulation, right? We all fear that terminology. And when we hear, oh, there's a new rule, we all kind of recoil and say, ugh, this is going to be bad. This is actually what the regulatory bodies are referring to as a defend forward strategy of saying, let's not just wait to thwart the attack and then recover from the attack. Let's figure out what those vulnerabilities might be and notify people of what those vulnerabilities might be and preempt them. Let's do this proactively and eliminate that from our potential future bad situations. I think that's a great philosophy. Defend forward. That preemptive nature. I think that's good for us as service providers, and I think our clients are going to love that kind of personality, the definition of what we can do. In no case ever more than in the field of critical infrastructure, right? We've talked before on this show about how critical infrastructure systems often are the kind that it's an old system. It is absolutely vulnerable. It is totally not patchable. And yet, if we take it offline, a couple 100,000 houses go without power for a day in order for us to patch and update to a new system. So they just don't have the luxury of doing this stuff in real time. Imagine if we could let all of these folks know these are the list of vulnerabilities that you might be dealing with. Here's what you can do preemptively. Here's how you could plan for some point in the future to have a least disruptive interruption to any services that might be affected, etc. I think this is a brilliant idea, and having a central resource that can notify critical infrastructure providers that they have a list of vulnerabilities and they could do something ahead of an attack. Hey, that's starting to make a whole lot of sense to me. So let's lean into this idea. Let's move to headline number 2, Bradley. Companies are moving forward with zero trust, but they still report challenges. What are we learning here?
All right. Well, the Cyber Risk Alliance's research division recently released findings from its Zero Trust survey of more than 200 security leaders and practitioners. According to a report from SC Media's Steve Zurier, the research found that of the 25% of respondents who said they partially or fully implemented Zero Trust, of those, they say that they're still having a hard time getting full buy-in from other departments when it comes to scaling these ideas across the enterprise. So the challenges continue despite making some initial progress. Indeed, most security leaders seem to recognize there will be roadblocks along the way. Nearly 2/3 of future adopters believe it will be moderately difficult to implement Zero Trust, with 30% saying they expect it to be very difficult. As for their priorities, 69% of respondents said they're focused on data security in terms of their main priority around Zero Trust. 51% said their organization's priority is cloud security. I'll also pass on CRA's top 4 recommendations for companies transitioning to a Zero Trust approach. That would be gain full visibility into your assets and resources, create Zero Trust pilot programs to test the concept, look for applications with minimal friction, and seek out expert organizations who have published their own guidance and recommendations. You can learn more all about the CRA research into Zero Trust if you go actually register for our SC Media March 2023 Zero Trust eSummit. We have a research session that delves even deeper into all of the findings. But in the meantime, we're going to move on to headline number 3 for you, Ryan. DMARC email security protections found in only 1% of nonprofits' domains. Tell us more.
So if you are in the business of cybersecurity, you are a professional at doing cybersecurity things, but you are also a professional at acronyms because we manufacture these things. DMARC, Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance. It is a standard that is being adopted widely in commercial enterprises for domain-based protections, which automatically flag and report emails that come from suspected bad domains or they've been spoofed or impersonated, right? So this is a standard that is out there. In the world of nonprofit organization, anything .org, right, out there in the world. This is not being adopted anywhere near as rapidly, and that is creating some serious vulnerabilities, as well as the researchers report some really unfortunately compelling opportunities for spoofing and phishing through these organizations. Think about it like this. If you got an email from anybodiesbusiness.com and it seemed a little bit hinky and you weren't quite sure about that thing, you would radar up and you would think twice about clicking on anything in that. But if it came in a reasonably believable way from something that said yourfavoritecharity.org, your defenses are down, you're a little bit more emotionally vulnerable, you are more likely to be victimized by that exploit, and that creates an unfortunate advantage for the bad guys. Well, we all look at this and we say, well, it's not that bad, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of businesses, there's not that many nonprofits in the world, so it's really not that big of a deal. 10 million verified.org domains in the world. Just 1.2% of that group has implemented this fundamental technique for identifying domain-based spoofing type activities. This is something that very small SMBs have adopted across the board, right? Mine has it, yours has it. Everybody kind of approaches things this way. In the nonprofit world, I don't know if it's for complexity. I don't know what the driving motivation is. But if I do the math correctly, we're talking millions of domains that are vulnerable and that are not going to be able to filter out, not only for their own protection, but for the pass along spoofing that can happen through these organizations. So I look at this as a potentially massive disruption, and we need to really dig in. Call to action to the MSSP community. Pull out your local phone directory, look up nonprofit, and start making phone calls. Because if you don't do it, somebody needs to reach out and provide these services to our friends in the nonprofit world. Okay. Headline number 4, MSP vendor partner touts new program to reduce environmental waste. Sounds interesting, Bradley. What do we need to know?
Yeah, well, Ty Trumbull from Channel E2E reports that asset lifecycle management automation vendor ScalePad has entered into what they call a restorative partnership agreement with Veritree to counteract the harmful effects of electronic waste by restoring North American habitats destroyed by wildfires. So basically, whenever when an MSP or MSSP client of theirs needs to decommission or replace a device that might be in disrepair, Veritree will plant a tree. Veritree describes itself as a tech platform connecting verified restorative projects with businesses. So this story happened to catch my eye. I'm personally not sure how many of these types of environmentally friendly partnerships like this exist in the cyber and tech space, but certainly in recent years, a lot of consumer-facing businesses have tried to adopt socially conscious causes, perhaps in some cases to strategically differentiate themselves or appeal to their customer base. It would be interesting to see if more B2B-focused vendors or even MSPs themselves take similar stances like this one and publicize their environmental efforts or other causes a bit more. So I thought that was a bit interesting. And finally, we have, drumroll please, our irrelevant news item of the week. Now, this is a real news pitch that Ryan or I have received in our inboxes for reasons that are entirely inexplicable to us. But we'll see if somehow we can make it about cybersecurity. Are you ready, Ryan?
I am ready.
All right. Well, I actually put two together for this one since they kind of had similar theming. So here's how this goes. The first one is, hi, Bradley. With food becoming increasingly expensive, it's important to find ways to store food for longer to be more cost effective. Fortunately, the founder of parenting and healthy food website Weelicious has amazing tips and tricks to make food last longer. Let me know if you're working on any relevant stories, I'm not, where Catherine can share tips to make grocery store purchases last, shopping smarter and storing smarter. And then we also have Another pitch from Passport Photo Online, which has compiled an extensive list of all of the best methods of getting the best deals on plane tickets in 2023. From simple advice such as traveling light to lesser known tricks like getting a better price for an emergency situation, you'll find plenty of tricks to keep ticket fees from damaging your travel budget. Things like don't forget to check if it's cheaper to pay in a foreign currency, or look for early morning or late night flights. So lots of tips I seem to get in the last week or two on savings on everyday things from grocery to travel. And so my question to you, Ryan, because I am going to make this one about cybersecurity, is what is your best cost-saving tip for MSSPs when they're shopping for vendor deals? Because I'm guessing that paying in a foreign currency probably isn't one of them.
See, that sounds interesting and really complicated, especially in this current financial climate. The main lesson that I take away from these two story pitches is, hey, public relations firms also read the news and financial sections of the newspaper, because apparently they're aware that we're all focused on saving money these days. Congratulations, guys. Cybersecurity professionals deserve affordable eggs just like everybody else, right? We want to save money on our groceries, and we do definitely want to get out and go someplace so that we can decompress from our very stressful jobs. Cheap plane tickets would be a very, very good idea. When it comes to the business of cybersecurity, there's a lot of conversation these days about cost savings. And let me say what not to do and then what to do, right? Number one, don't just lay off staff in order to make your numbers temporarily attractive. We've seen an unfortunate number of those announcements around our very own industry in the last couple of months as people are right-sizing their financials so that they can hit a quarterly benchmark and their stock price will be buoyed and the CEO will make a lot of money and shareholders will be rewarded. I am all for good financial performance and hitting your targets, but laying off thousands of people, or in your case, dozens of people or a few people, without considering the ripple effect on operational capabilities and effectiveness, that's rarely a good idea in business, but in a continuous service environment like cybersecurity, that is terribly bad business practice. So let's think through the ripple effect before we do this. The what you can do. Let's put an ROI calculation into everything we do and see if our service providers can communicate, right? We often get asked this question, right? They're like, well, what's the business value of the services that you provide? And lots of people stammer and they stutter and we try real hard. We're experts and whatever. It's like, okay, cool. But I gave you $1, you did something and I got more than $1 in return. What is that calculation in our service provider relationship? Whatever service it is that you are consuming, if your service provider cannot articulate their value in numbers, actual currency terms, then I'm not saying fire them today. I'm saying look for someone else who can, because the world of services is getting very competitive. PR firms, marketing firms, HR firms, staffing and recruiting firms, accounting firms, they all live in the same world and they're all looking for deals for affordable eggs at the grocery store as well. Let's ask them to sharpen their pencil and hunt on our behalf as well.
Excellent advice, but unfortunately, we cannot afford to spend any more time on this because we are out of time. So we're going to wrap it up there, but don't worry, we'll be back again soon for episode number 15. Meanwhile, feel free to check out even more cybersecurity podcast content on the SC Media, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E websites. Until next time, I'm Bradley Barth.
And I am Ryan Morris. Please reach out to us via our show page with your comments, questions, and insights about the business of cybersecurity, and then we will collect those comments and provide you with feedback to keep the conversation going on the next episode of Cyber for Hire, your inside source for cyber outsourcing.